Imagine a queen whose name still echoes through the centuries, a synonym for manipulation, idolatry, and cruelty, Jezebel. But who was this woman whose story became a symbol of rebellion against God? Today, we will dive deep into her life and actions to understand how her choices led her to one of the most tragic fates anyone could imagine. Jezebel's story begins long before her marriage to Ahab in a prosperous and wealthy land, Sidon, located in Phoenicia, one of the most influential regions of the ancient world. Born a princess, Jezebel was the daughter of Ethbaal, the king of Sidon. But Ethbaal was not just a king, he was also the high priest of Baal, one of the most feared and revered gods of that time. Baal was considered the god of storms, fertility, and prosperity. Jezebel grew up surrounded by rituals, sacrifices, and a culture that regarded Baal as the source of all power. From a young age, Jezebel showed a strong personality and unshakable determination. She wasn't just a princess waiting to be married. She learned the art of persuasion, the politics of power, and most importantly, an unrelenting devotion to her God. For her, Baal wasn't just a belief, it was her identity. It was in this context that Jezebel was promised to Ahab, the king of Israel, in a marriage intended to seal a political alliance between Sidon and Israel. Although Ahab was Israel's ruler, he was a weak man, easily influenced and, as we will see, completely dominated by Jezebel. Upon arriving in Israel, Jezebel wasted no time. Even though she had become queen of a people who worshipped the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, she brought with her the gods of her homeland, and she didn't stop there. Jezebel wasn't content to practice her religion privately. She wanted the entire kingdom of Israel to worship Baal. Using resources from the royal treasury, she built grand temples and altars dedicated to Baal and Asherah, the goddess of fertility. Under her influence, Ahab ordered the people to begin worshipping these foreign gods. But Jezebel was not satisfied with simply sharing space with the God of Israel. To her, there was no room for two gods in her kingdom. With cold and ruthless determination, she launched a persecution against the Lord's prophets. Many were killed, their families destroyed, and their followers forced to choose between renouncing their faith or facing death. The few who survived hid in caves, like the prophet Obadiah, who risked his life to protect a small group of 100 prophets, hiding and feeding them in secret. While the people suffered, Jezebel thrived. She walked through the palace with the confidence of someone who never needed permission for anything. Her garments, made of the finest fabrics and adorned with brilliant jewels, reflected the wealth accumulated at the expense of a nation in agony. Jezebel controlled the king with an unquestioned authority. Her word was law, and even Ahab bowed to her will. The throne may have been his, but the power was undeniably hers. When news of the drought began to spread, Jezebel responded with cold indifference. To her, it was just a setback, something that sacrifices to Baal would surely fix. The people could suffer, but Jezebel didn't care. Instead, she saw the drought as another opportunity to reaffirm her God's power. Baal's altars were adorned with even grander offerings. Sacrifices became more frequent, and priests cried out day and night, but the sky remained closed. In this setting of despair and arrogance, God raised up a man who would become Jezebel's greatest adversary, Elijah. The prophet Elijah was everything Jezebel despised. He wore no fine robes, only camel skins. He carried no riches, only the word of God. And above all, he did not fear the queen. To Jezebel, Elijah was a direct challenge to her authority and to the gods she so fervently worshipped. His mere presence was a reminder that her power had limits. One day, Elijah marched to Ahab's palace. The road was dry, cracked, like the land itself was crumbling under the weight of the curse upon Israel. Inside the palace, Elijah found luxury, stifled by the smell of incense burning at Baal's altars. Guards watched him warily, but none dared stop him. He carried himself like a man who knew exactly why he was there. Standing before Ahab, Elijah raised his voice with authority, not from titles, but from the certainty that God was with him. "As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, before whom I stand, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years, except at my word." The words echoed through the hall, and the silence that followed was deafening. Ahab was stunned, speechless. When Jezebel heard the declaration, her blood boiled. Who was this man to challenge her gods, to question Baal's authority? The god of storms, right in her own palace. But Elijah didn't wait for a response. He turned and left, leaving behind a silence thick with tension. Imagine the impact of that declaration. Israel was a land that depended entirely on rain. Without it, crops would fail, livestock would die, and famine would be inevitable. But this wasn't just a forecast, it was a direct challenge. Elijah was declaring that the God of Israel, not Baal, controlled the rain. It was as if he tore the veil from the kingdom's idolatry, exposing its fragility, and so it happened. For 3.5 years, not a single drop of rain fell on Israel. The first weeks of drought were met with murmurs of unease, but also hope. Many believed Baal would answer soon, but as months passed and the skies remained unchangingly blue, hope began to fade. People started asking, could Elijah's God be the true God? While the people suffered from hunger and despair, Jezebel refused to yield. To her, the drought wasn't a sign of her God's weakness, but an affront that needed to be fought. Jezebel didn't just ignore Elijah's message, she intensified her devotion to Baal. Sacrifices became bloodier, rituals more elaborate, songs more desperate, but none of it worked. Still, Jezebel refused to admit defeat. At the same time, she redoubled her efforts to exterminate the prophets of Israel's God. Jezebel ordered relentless persecutions. Anyone who dared stand against her was executed. The few prophets left had to hide in caves, living off scraps and prayers. Jezebel's hand seemed to stretch across the entire kingdom, crushing any resistance with ruthless determination. But with each dry day and each field turning to dust, Jezebel's power began to be questioned, not by her enemies, but by those who had once followed her blindly. Yet still, she remained unshaken. To admit the truth would mean admitting her entire kingdom of control and manipulation was built on sinking sand. That was something she would never do. The people suffered. Elijah continued his mission. He became a symbol of resistance against the spiritual oppression imposed by Jezebel. But Jezebel, with her hardened heart, saw Elijah as an enemy to be destroyed. For her, the battle was not just political, it was personal. Elijah represented what she despised most, faithfulness to the God of Israel. Then Elijah did the unthinkable. He challenged Baal's prophets to a public showdown on Mount Carmel. Picture the scene, hundreds of Baal's prophets in ceremonial garb, surrounded by crowds of Israelites, eager to see which god would respond. On one side, Elijah stood alone, with unwavering confidence in the Lord. On the other, 450 prophets of Baal, shouting and dancing around an altar. Elijah set the rules. Each side would prepare a sacrifice, but without lighting a fire. The God who answered with fire from heaven would be declared the true God. It was a clear, direct, and unavoidable challenge. Baal's prophets went first. They cried out, danced, shouted for hours, but nothing happened. The silence from the sky was deafening. Elijah, with biting sarcasm, said, "Shout louder. Maybe Baal is busy or sleeping and needs to be awakened." The crowd began to see that the power Jezebel had proclaimed was empty. When it was Elijah's turn, he did something even bolder. He ordered the altar to be soaked with water, so much that a small trench formed around it. Then he prayed, not with shouting, not with elaborate rituals, but with faith. O Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant. And the impossible happened. Fire fell from heaven, consuming not just the sacrifice, but the altar, the stones, and even the water. The people who had been divided fell to their knees, declaring, "The Lord, He is God! The Lord, He is God!" Elijah's victory seemed like the end of Jezebel's reign, but it wasn't. When she heard what happened, Jezebel was furious. Her rage wasn't just at Elijah, it was at everything he represented. She vowed to kill him, and Elijah, though a man of faith, fled for his life. He knew Jezebel never made idle threats. But Jezebel didn't stop. Her control over Ahab and the kingdom of Israel remained intact. One striking example of her cruelty and manipulation was the case of Naboth, a simple man who owned a vineyard near the royal palace. Ahab wanted that vineyard, but Naboth refused to sell it, saying it was his ancestral inheritance and he could not part with it. Ahab returned to the palace sulking, like a child denied a toy. When Jezebel saw him and asked why he was upset, and Ahab explained, Jezebel mocked his weakness. "Is this how the king of Israel acts? Get up. I'll get you Naboth's vineyard." And Jezebel took action. She wrote letters in Ahab's name, ordering that Naboth be falsely accused of blasphemy against God and the king. 2 men were paid to testify against him, and Naboth was sentenced to death by stoning. After his execution, Jezebel handed the vineyard over to Ahab like it was a trivial gift. But God saw everything, and he did not remain silent. The prophet Elijah was sent once again, this time with a direct message. "In the place where dogs licked Naboth's blood, they will lick your blood as well. And as for Jezebel, dogs will devour your flesh by the wall of Jezreel." Imagine hearing such a terrifying prophecy. Jezebel, in her arrogance, ignored the warning. But her downfall was approaching. Years passed, and her influence began to fade. After Ahab's death in battle, Jezebel continued to exert power through her sons, who took the throne. But a new leader arose in Israel, Jehu, a military commander anointed by God to destroy Ahab's line and restore the worship of the Lord. When Jehu marched toward Jezebel, she knew the end was near. Yet she showed no fear. In one final act of defiance, she prepared herself like a queen, painted her eyes, styled her hair, and positioned herself at a palace window, not as if greeting an enemy, but receiving a guest. Jehu entered the palace gates, and there she was, looking down at him with a face that mixed scorn and mockery. Despite everything, she still radiated a presence of authority, as if her reign wasn't about to collapse. With a firm voice, Jezebel taunted him, "Have you come in peace, you murderer of your master?" But Jehu was unmoved. He looked up at the window and shouted to the servants beside her, "Who is on my side?" There was a moment of silence. The servants' eyes met, and something shifted. The fear Jezebel once inspired had vanished. Slowly, they turned against her, showing they were no longer willing to serve her. "Throw her down," Jehu ordered, and they did. Jezebel was hurled from the window, and her body struck the ground with brutal force. Her blood splattered the walls, and Jehu's horses trampled her without hesitation, as if she were no more than dust beneath their hooves. Jehu, with no ceremony, entered the palace. As he ate and drank, he gave the following order, "Bury that cursed woman, for she is a king's daughter." Even in her death, Jehu showed a kind of respect for Jezebel's royal lineage. But her fate had already been sealed. When the servants went to bury her, they found only her skull, feet, and the palms of her hands. The dogs had devoured the rest. It was exactly as the prophet Elijah had said years earlier. In the field of Jezreel, dogs will devour Jezebel's flesh. Her body will be like refuse on the ground. No one will be able to say, "This is Jezebel." This was the final fall of the woman who dared to challenge the God of Israel, a figure who once seemed untouchable, but whose pride and ambition led her to a tragic and humiliating end. Jezebel's story isn't just about an evil queen. It's a powerful reminder that no earthly power can stand against divine justice. Jezebel had it all: wealth, influence, power. But she used those gifts to spread idolatry, manipulate the weak, and persecute the righteous. In the end, her life became a cautionary tale, an example of how even the mighty will fall when they rise up against the living God.